And Molly and Mary, thank you for the introduction. Kelly, always a pleasure to see you. I was talking to Mary yesterday, and I have an outline. If you're interested in the outline after the presentation, I'll just drop me a email and I'll get it to you, okay? It'll outline some of the most important things you need to know as you go through your career now. One of the things I would say to everybody, and I was basically on a soccer field on Sunday, and I was talking to these guys, and it's kind of interesting. None of them really started looking at retirement until they hit 50. And 50 is about 20 years too late. And now they're worried about healthcare and retirement. They're worried about, do I have enough money to retire? And I would tell you, what I'm going to do here today is give you terms and conditions that are important for you to negotiate in your contract. And before we talk about the actual terms, I'm going to go over what you need to do to make sure that you're going to obtain the best contract that you possibly can. Now, recognize a couple of things. The state of public education today is a lot different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And you don't have the time to really understand what is going on in the marketplace. And so that's why it's very important as you prepare that you contact SANES and let us help you, even if you don't want us at the table, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But just to hear what's going on, it's absolutely critical for a successful contract. I always use the phrase, I don't want the SANES members to be flipping hamburgers at McDonald's when they hit 65. Because we didn't save right, we didn't have enough money, whatever. So with that said, let's jump right into it. So I was going over with Mary yesterday, how many units in Region 10 are up this year and how many are up next year. It's a big number. And what I would tell you is if your contract expires June 30th, 2024, and you haven't started yet, you're too late. But it's not over, you're just late, okay? However, if your contract expires in 2025 in June, well, you're just about right to start. So always think of it a year out. And the reason for that is, so when your bargaining falls apart, and sometimes it does fall apart, you're not going to be at mediation and fact-finding 2 or 3 years down the road. You're going to be at it in the year the contract expires, which I think is important. Now, how do we contact SANES is often a question I get when people talk about negotiations. And I would tell you your unit president should reach out and ask SANES about information for initiating the contract process. Now, the role of SANES in negotiations is subject to one very important thing, and it is whatever you as the client want. And for example, today on the screen and let's call it our Hollywood Squares, we got Fred in the middle, who is one of the labor relations specialists who does negotiations for us. All right. You also can have an attorney or both, a labor relations specialist and an attorney. That is your choice, and we'll talk about that choice a little later. The first thing you really want to do or take advantage of when you contact SANES is have SANES look at the district's financial ability to pay. As you know, we just went through a tough budget cycle. The governor, unsurprisingly, has rescinded a lot of the foundation aid and a lot of the benefits that we've acquired over the last several years. And now she's going to convene a state commission to look into how we do foundation aid and state aid itself. That is, if I had to translate that for you, that means she's going to get some think tank to support cutting aid to school districts. Okay. She's just going through the fancy process. So we need somebody like we have, Cindy Yeager, who does a financial analysis of the district over a 5-year continuum to provide us with information that the district does have the ability to pay. We also have an insurance consultant who will often be asked to compare. We have a current plan, let's say it's a PPO, they want to put us in a high deductible plan, they want to put us in an EPO plan, should we do this? And they'll give you the positives and the negatives of that, and so you can have that. And equally important as the first two, we also have Equitable. And Equitable has a vast array of products that they can offer you. And I would always suggest to you to invite them in, at least to have them look at your contract as well. All right, moving quickly. The next thing is the president, and you may have to refer to your bylaws here, formulates the negotiating committee. Who's going to be on the negotiating committee? I will tell you two things I always recommend. One, the negotiating team should have an odd number of people, because I've had it twice in my 22 years of collective bargaining in this state where I had an even number of people and they looked to me to break the tie. I am not a tiebreaker. I'm your attorney. I only give you advice. I do not decide for you. So always go with an odd number of people. Second thing, try to have tenured people, because no matter how understanding the parties are at the table, it often becomes a personal issue. So if you're non-tenured, you run the risk of not getting tenured. All right, so that's another thing. The third consideration is what I call a political consideration. If you have 3 members on the bargaining team and 2 are absolutely despised by the bargaining, by the management, probably not a good idea to have them at the table. Because you know, the old expression, you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. So you may want to consider that as well. So in terms of next step, you have your team prepared. You've been consulting with Zanies, and now you're at the point of what do we do for proposals? I would always suggest that you send a survey out to the bargaining unit members, okay? And typically, number 1 is money. Number 2, keep my benefits the way they are. Now, occasionally, if there's some issues in the district about, for example, attending board meetings at night or going to weekend events, that may be a third kind of area that you'll get some pushback on, okay? Or basically people were denied vacation time under certain circumstances. So once you get all that, all that feedback, then you start preparing your proposals. Zanies will prepare them for you. We just need you to tell us what it is that you're seeking, and we'll put it into, a proper form, referring to the contract provisions. If they're pre-existing contract provisions, or if they're new, we'll designate or we'll identify them as new proposals. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I ask the bargaining unit, has anything happened since the last round of bargaining that the unit's not happy with? And sometimes through talking to the unit, you discern that there is a term or condition that has to be added to stop something that has occurred. So I would suggest to you to really, sit down with Zanies and discuss that. Also, Zanies provides this. We will review your contract for clarity, functionality, and relevancy. Now, there's a few contracts still that continue to have agency shop fees. Those are illegal under the Supreme Court ruling in the Janus case in, I think, 2018. So that would be a provision that we would want to eliminate from your contract. Now, a related thing is, and I'll just give it as a brief aside here, is, well, Art, if somebody doesn't pay dues, do they vote on the contract when it's done? And the answer to that is resounding no. If they don't pay dues, they're not in good standing and they cannot vote on the contract. Now, another thing I like to do, and good bargainers like Fred do it as well, is strategic planning, which means you try to improve a benefit, but you don't go for the home run on the first proposal in the first contract. You basically go for the single. And something along that line would be, okay, let us see if we can introduce a vacation buyback provision. You never had one before. All right, and we'll talk about it a little later. There are pros and cons to that. So you would want to propose that as a proposal. Now, you're not going to ask for 10 days of vacation buyback in the first contract. You're going to do it maybe 3 to 5 days. And that's just smart strategic planning, okay? There are other provisions too that you may want to do. One of the ones I'm going to talk about a little later too is virtual work. So you may want to try to put that into the contract as well. All right. Now, some of the things that we do here at St. E's for your benefit is I always break down contract. We talked about having Cindy Yeager do the ability to pay. All right, that analysis. Then there's also an intra-district analysis that St. E's likes to use. And that basically is a contract review of the central office administrators, the teachers unit. Occasionally, I'll look at a blue collar unit if there's a particular benefit that I am studying. And I compare them. I look at the salary increases, I look at the benefit levels, I look at the work year, I look at the time off, and I try to formulate how the administrators are in that continuum. Most of you don't know this. Back up until Taylor Law's enactment back in 1967, the state legislature set salaries for public school administrators, superintendents, and teachers. And my rule of thumb is always that central office gets paid the most, administrators should be paid the second highest salaries, and the teachers would follow after that. One of the things when you're doing an intra district analysis, you can't cherry pick all the best from each of the contracts. So if you see a couple of terms that you really want, I would focus on 1 or 2, not 6 or 7. All right. The next part of the analysis, getting ready for bargaining, is your inter-district analysis. And what does that mean? That means you're going to take comparable districts, typically in your county, and pull their contracts. We may have to foil their salaries, and I do a foil which includes salaries, the years in the title, the years in the district, years in education, so I can mix apples and apples to oranges and oranges. So on the call, I know we have several people from Syracuse, so you're not going to be looking at what does Onondaga do necessarily. You're going to be looking at what Rochester does, Buffalo does, Yonkers does. All right, New York City is honestly a entity unto itself. All right, but like Dawn's up in the Altmark Parish, so she's going to be looking at small rural districts, and so you want to get comparable districts typically in your county. But if your school district is adjacent to 2 counties, you may have to do like Lewis and or what's the other one, St. Lawrence County or Oswego County. You have to look at comparable districts. All right, we talked about the ability to pay already. I can tell you, generally speaking, most financial people in the school districts blew it. Now you're gonna say, "Oh my God, what do you mean by that?" Or over the last 5 years or 4 years, there has been a tremendous amount of money dumped into public education. We can start with the coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations. We can do the American Rescue Funds, and then we have the foundation aid. Now, the CRRSA funds have had to have been expended by last September. The American Rescue Funds, which totaled $9 billion with a B, have to be expended by this September. I find in most school districts, they spent that money wildly. Another observation I've made is the foundation aid, that each district got tremendous increases in foundation aid for the last 3 years. Well, this year you didn't. And the theory was when they gave those increases were supposed to last 10 years. I have seen very few school districts financially plan for that. And they basically didn't raise taxes high enough, overspent money, and it's basically that's where we're stuck now. One of the things you want to look at too is how does the district budget? And we analyze this. You have to look at the restricted fund balance. You have to look at the unrestricted fund balance. Understanding the difference in restricted fund balance typically is simply a board vote from removing it to one to the other, but sometimes it changes. So you have to understand that as well. Unrestricted fund balance is really where that's if you've heard it before, the 4% over the 4% that a school district's allowed to have money. A lot of districts go over that. They also go over it by including in the budget an over reporting of expenditures and an under reporting of revenues, so that they can basically hide 1 to 1.5% in the budget each year and just simply roll it over. All right, other things we look at is, for example, TRS data. What's the contribution rates for TRS? Are they increasing or decreasing? Right now, they slightly decreased for TRS. However, ERS increased by over 1%. So that means the district has to come up with an extra 1% to pay the pensions for the members who are assigned in the employee retirement system. Another indicator we look at, St. E's, is the inflationary rate. Now, most of you may not know, the consumer price index has been on a roller coaster for the last 4 years or 3.5 years. So I'm going to give you a couple numbers just to chew on. In September 2020, the consumer price index for New York, as reported by the U.S. Department of Labor, was 1.9%. All right. In June of 22, that increased to 7.4%. And then just last month, it's down to 3.4%. So you can see it's a roller coaster. And the sad thing is the prices are going up, up, up. They never go down. And you've heard people say, well, geez, it's really tough to live because everything's costing so much more. Correct. If you just extrapolated those 4 years, you've increased 12% the cost of everything. So just keep that in mind. The one index that I like to use is what's called the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index. If you read the Wall Street Journal and listen to banks, that is the one that's used by the federal government to set the Fed rate, and how much it costs on the street to borrow money. And those rates in September of 20, it was 1.25%. In June of 22, that number had escalated to 7.14%. Now, the interesting difference here is when you go to March of 24, that number is reporting at 2.45%, which is basically 1% less than the CPI number. So that's important. And you're going to say, what's the difference between the two of them? The personal expenditure consumption index does not factor in energy or food because those are volatile indexes. They factor in other costs. All right. Now you got a big decision. You got your financial stuff done. You got your proposals done. Now your choice is, what do I use St. E's for? All right. I will tell you, St. E's can serve as the chief negotiator. They can serve in any role you deem appropriate. It is based on your local dynamics and what you want. In terms of team composition, talk a little bit more about that for a second. On the team, and remember the team is a number of tenured individuals, you need somebody who knows the history very well, okay? Because if terms are being discussed and you basically have neophytes on the board, on the team, they're not going to know what that means, that provision, or what'd you give up to get it, or what'd you get to agree to something the district wanted. So I would always recommend having a historian, if you will. Second thing is you have to designate a person in the unit to take notes for the unit. We will take notes ourselves and we keep them up in the cloud now, so you can understand that. But it's not so important for now. That will be important later when you get to the point where there's a grievance. And now you're looking at an article you introduced into the contract 8, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And what were the positions of the parties as they negotiated that? That's an important thing for, if you will, extrinsic evidence to establish the party's intent. Also, you want to have somebody who likes to dabble in math and does their own cost out. So those Sainies will cost out the contract too. You know, contract proposals, it's important that you may have somebody you want there. Now, what's important about the process too, and this is very important, and some of the bigger units, becomes critically important. Whoever is chosen to serve on the negotiating team, you don't tell anybody what goes on in the negotiations. They're confidential and they're for a purpose. You don't want to sort of like play out your hand or show your hand. You want to keep it close to the vest. So that's why we often recommend that you do not, you maintain confidentiality. Only the people who are on a team get to discuss it. And typically they'll have prep sessions where they'll discuss certain things, but you don't discuss it with the rank and file. All right. Does anybody have any questions right now, or is that pretty self-explanatory? Okay, that seems good. Let's move on. All right, here we go. Common terms and conditions that you need in the contract. Well, I will tell you APPR is changing, right? We're going to be seeing the regs and everything coming out. You're no longer, well, let me preface it by this. Student component category or subcomponent, you know, how students perform on a test, are no longer going to be part of the APPR. That's a good thing. They are going more back to a traditional observation format. However, if you are probationary, they are still going to require that you be observed for 4 years, unless you have the shortened tenure and get 3 years. Okay. Another thing with that is, you will not be able, or I should say this, with tenured folks, you do not have to be evaluated every year. So it'll become a subject of bargaining in this round, you know, and you may say if anyone gets a effective rating, they will only be evaluated once every 3 years. All right, or 4 years. If you get a highly effective, once every 6 years. I'm just throwing out numbers right now. If you're developing, you have to be evaluated until you get an effective. If you're ineffective, you have to be evaluated until you get an effective. You know, something like that. Those are the 3 big components I see coming out of the APPR for you, okay? Now, also, we can't lose sight of this. And I saw this up in Region 10 recently. We litigated a contract grievance procedure, evaluation procedure, which had a very good provision in it. It said that if an employee was not performing up to professional standards, they had to be notified in writing of what was wrong, what needed to be improved on, and advised in writing that they were in danger of being terminated. Okay? And I have litigated evaluation procedures several times now. What happened in this particular district is they did not evaluate the person, and then they summarily terminated them with a 3031 notice. Everybody knows what that is. That's the notice nobody wants to get. And then the irony here was they gave him his APPR rating and he was effective after they terminated him. So we had this grievance recently and the district settled it. And they, you know, the option was an arbitrator or a court cannot grant you tenure. All you get is another year of service. of probationary term. So in that case, the guy opted for money and decided not to return to the district. They rescinded the termination and gave him the opportunity to resign. But without that provision in the contract, he would have been on the street. So important to consider. The most important thing you can do in bargaining is what? Money. Money, 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 money. Get as much money as you can, right? So when you think of money, Fred's very good at this, you want to think about what type of money am I getting? Is it taxable? If it's taxable, it's most likely going to be pensionable. So those are the two terms you got to understand. Is it taxable money? Is it pensionable money? Okay. Annual increases. What are you seeing out on the street? Well, in Region 10, it could be anywhere from 3 to 4.5%, depending on where you are. Okay. You have to be mindful of this. And this is something that happens a lot. It's what I call basically salary compression or equitable problems. You have 3 elementary principals, and they're all making $160,000, let's say, hypothetically. They hire a new elementary principal off the street, and they're making $175,000. And now you have a problem because the 3 incumbents who've been there 5, 7, and 9 years say, how can this person be making more than I'm making? I would say, well, it's unfair, but we'll make a proposal for equitable adjustments. And that's what you try to do to create that. Another thing that you may want to try to introduce into a contract is what I call loyalty raises, or kiss me pay, merit pay, performance-based pay. Those, I would say, should not be part of the economic equation. I typically don't like them because they become divisive in terms of, well, she got it every year. Oh, she must be a friend of the superintendent kind of deal. So I try to avoid those. What I try to do is try to maintain salary schedule or salary ranges, or introduce them. Now, they're very hard to introduce now because most school districts don't want to have the increment every year as a part of the basic course of compensation. But hey, there's only one rule of bargaining. And I say this all the time. You will never get anything you do not ask for. Typically, when's the best time to get raises? When you're going into the job or when you announce you're going to leave the job. Because then they're going to try to keep you. But the funny thing is, you can negotiate the one as you're coming in the door, but the unit would have to negotiate for you if they want to retain your services. You can't do that yourself. Otherwise, you're going to be considered in violation of the Taylor law, and it's called self-dealing. And up in, where was that? Oh, it was in Carthage. We had that problem once, and we filed an improper practice charge in Carthage, and of course, everybody then got free health care for life under that contract. How sweet was that deal? Pretty good. Okay, another good thing to try to introduce, if you don't have it, if you have it, improve it, is longevity. Okay, the thing about longevity is simple. It really is a salary schedule, albeit over a longer period of time. I like not 5-year not 5-year increments, like 5, 10, 15. I like to do them every 3 years. And the reason for that is simple. That means everyone in the unit gets a raise, an additional raise, once every contract period. Most contracts typically run 3 years. Now, the question that you negotiate is not only the frequency of the steps, but also the amount of the steps. And in addition to that, a third consideration is, do you factor in years in public ed, which would be great, or do they say years in the district, which is okay still, or years in the administrative bargaining, which is the least beneficial? Then we get into the whole point of how is the money paid? Okay, and this is the part that has a TRS understanding and ramification that you have to understand. Okay. If it's added to base salary, it's easy. Okay, so that means, and this is very important because I have this problem a lot with clients. All right, Art, I make $100,000 a year and I'm going to get my first longevity after 6 years because I have a tenure stipend in there. We'll talk about that in a second. And now after 6 years, I get $1,000 added to my base salary. Okay. Do I get that $1,000 added to my base salary every year? No. You get it the year that you reach your 6 year, complete your 6 year of service. Then it's in your base salary. Okay. And now it's compounding, which is what you want. It's not as if, and people think, well, no, it's in my base salary, so I get every year. No, you only get the year that you reach the milestone. Once it's in the base, it's in the base. Another kind of one you see a lot is using the mythical 6 year of service, you get 1,000. 9th year of service, you get another, you get 1,500. And then at 12 years of service, you get $2,000. Now, if that was only continuous after 12 years of, remember, 6 years, 1,000, 9 years, 1,500, 12 years, you get $2,000. If your longevity was only continuous, after 12 years, you would get only $2,000. Okay? So basically, it only moved up $500 each milestone. If it's continuous and cumulative, then you would get the 1,000 for 6 plus the 1,500 at 9, which is 2,500, plus the 2,000 at 12, and now you're at 4,500. That's continuous and cumulative. What I've done in some of those contracts, which were continuous and cumulative, I have now taken the first or maybe the last step and added it to base. Okay, so that's a tip for you guys on longevity. Always remember, any money, is it pensionable? You want to make that big number as big as you can. I alluded to this before. If you don't have a tenure stipend, put a tenure stipend in. Add that to base so that upon achieving tenure, either at 3 or 4 years, everybody understands now if you've been previously tenured and you were hired in your position post June 1st, 2020, you can get a reduced probationary term of 3 years. So I would just say, upon receiving tenure, you will be awarded a increase to your base salary of X and negotiate what that is. Advanced degrees, okay? That's an ED or a PhD or a doctorate degree in something. You can get additional money for that. All right, again, add it to base. Now I'm going to do a query here. Which do you think is more advantageous? Getting a doctorate stipend added to base or getting your doctorate paid for? Everybody knows, right? You want your doctorate paid for because that's big bucks. But if they won't pay for your doctorate, at least get the credit. Yeah, at least get credit for it. All right. Annual increments. Some contracts, although not having a salary schedule, put in a provision that says prior to any annual salary increase, an increment will be added to base salary of, let's say, 1,000, 1,500, and then the annual salary increase will be computed from that bigger number. Always do the annual salary increase after you're adding tenure stipends, longevity to base, any of that other money, okay? Course credits. There are several contracts that talk about course credits. I do know Rome has it because I've negotiated that contract for 100 years now. And they have an increment. I mean, they have a course credit, which I think it comes out to be about $1,200. It's not too shabby. And that gets added to their base salary. Evening and supplemental pay or weekend pay. This provision is becoming more and more talked about and negotiated. It basically provides a mechanism that if they require you to attend a certain amount of evening events or weekend events, you will receive a compensation. The largest amount of compensation I've seen so far is, I think it's now up to $120 per event. And that's on Long Island. So they could attend 20 or 30 of those events. So it's not bad money. That money will probably not be added to your pension, but if you have to spend your time in the district on these events, it's at least some compensation and recognition. Also, you may want to set an allowance for meals as well, okay? All right, performance-based pay, I talked about it a little bit. If you're gonna go for it, I would tell you, try to get to base salary. All right. How many of you have, I think most of you should have non-elective 403Bs. But many of you don't have 457 plans, which are also available to public employees like yourselves. And this is something that if you have a unit that's primarily more senior, i.e. over 50, it's an additional mechanism to hide up to this year, $23,000 a year. So just think of it. You have your house paid for, the kids' college paid for, and now you're earning the highest income you've ever earned. You may want to put a lot of money away for 4 or 5 years in your 403B or your 457 plan. I mean, you can maximize them honestly up to almost $60,000. So add those. A new one I've been doing, this is something you may want to take a note on, is having the employer contribute to your 403B an amount of money equal to, let's say, 1% of your salary. So it's an employer payment, a non-elective, into your 403B. If you will, it's like forced savings. This is one I've been seeing a lot of lately for a very simple reason. The employer would be more willing to pay you that money because they don't have to pay the pension benefit on it, because that's not considered pensionable money. So they don't have to pay the TRS money on that. But it's another way of hiding money and putting money into your contract. So think about that. We talked a little bit about vacation buyouts, annual vacation leave buyouts. You can do it for sick, you can do it for vacation, personal. Just make sure that if you're getting that money paid to you on retirement into a 403B, you can't take it as cash as an active employee. So you may have to take it as a non-elective money, or you may have to maybe do this. We will make our sick leave payout non-elective, but we'll make our vacation leave payout annually elective. You know, so that basically that money will come as a cash payment. Right, so that's something considered. We talked about already, I'd rather take the money, if they're gonna pay you for your doctorate degrees, take that money as cash. All right, I mean, take that as payment, not as a doctorate stipend. The next big issue in bargaining besides compensation is health insurance. All right. This is the battleground. Over the last 20 years in public and private sector, the healthcare benefits for employees have been significantly eroded. You know, 30 years, 20 years ago, you didn't have to pay for healthcare at all. Now you're paying anywhere from 12, 15% to 25% on Long Island, 27%. I even have a district that pays 29%. All right. The big benefit they're trying to erode is retirement healthcare. And it's absolutely critical that you confer with Sainies on retirement healthcare, because a simple misstep could cost you thousands of dollars when you're on a fixed income in retirement. You have to make sure your language on the retirement healthcare benefit is clear as to what the plan is, what the contribution rate is, what the copays are, what your Medicare reimbursement is for you and your spouse, and you have to spell it out to say that it will last for your lifetime. Okay. You also want to know, is there a right of survivorship? Meaning, if I, as a covered employee, die before my wife or my husband, do they get to continue in the plan? That should be spelled out as well. All right. There's a big battle going on with, well, districts keep us on the active health insurance plan. And I would tell you that's probably a mistake after post 65, because that's when you go on Medicare. And you have to enroll in Medicare. You should do it within, I would do it within 90 days before you hit 65. Get it all done. And that's when your school district insurance drops down to secondary coverage. You should spell out, is the district going to put me in a Medicare supplemental plan? The best Medicare supplemental plans are either G or K, all right? Or the big thing a lot of districts are doing and trying to push you into Medicare Advantage plans, all right? Some of them are good, some of them aren't that good. But these are all negotiable items, so keep that in mind. Active health insurance plans. There's only 2 districts I know of who still have indemnity plans in New York. That's Binghamton, and that is Rome. I don't know of any other school districts that carry the indemnity plan. What is an indemnity plan? An indemnity plan is you can go anywhere in New York and get coverage. You can go outside of New York, i.e. portability, and get coverage. And typically you don't pay anything. All right, those are traditional plans. They are a dinosaur. You don't see them. Like I told you, out of 720 districts, I only know of 2 that still have them. And by the way, in those districts, they get paid less because of that. All right. So we've moved away from indemnity plans. We have PPOs, we have POSs, we have HMOs, and they've sort of fallen through the wayside, and they've been reincarnated as EPOs. And then you have the dreaded metal plans. And then, yes, Fred's giving me the evil crucifix look. And within them, you got the famous high deductible plan. Now, let me tell you, if you're all 24 years of age, all healthy, a high deductible plan is not a bad thing. But none of you like that. Most administrators I see are over 40 and they have families. And the high deductible plan just blows them up because they're going to spend a lot of money reaching that deductible. So I would tell you to look at the deductibles, look at the out-of-pocket expenditures. And in terms of the plan, again, spell it out like you would in retirement healthcare, exactly what the plan is, exactly what the out-of-pockets, exactly what the deductibles are, the co-pays for drugs. And then you get to the contribution level. When I started years and years ago, it used to be just a flat dollar amount you paid, which is great because it never escalated. Now we're firmly into the percentage, okay? But some bargaining units, and I know we have a lot of people from Syracuse on the call or on the Zoom today, you have people with a lot of different salary levels. And I've seen this recently at the college level when I negotiate collective bargaining at the college level. I've seen it in some school districts too, for that matter, but they now are attributing healthcare contributions to your salary. So it will look like something like this. You will contribute 2% of your salary toward the cost of healthcare. So you have to factor out, does 2% of my salary better or worse than paying 15% of the cost of the health plan? Right? You got to do simple math, but that's something you may want to consider. Drug plans are very important. Single largest cost in any health plan. Okay. Do any of you think your healthcare costs have decreased since COVID? No. The state intentionally kept healthcare costs down for 3 years. And how they did it was simple. When insurers tried to petition them to increase their premiums, the state insurance department said no. That was until last year, 2023. And then you saw astronomical double-digit increases in healthcare cost. I mean, for example, I don't know if many of you understand what the New York State Health Insurance Plan is, NYCHIP. That plan increased 16%. It now costs $40,000 a year. And many years ago, I was at a Cornell University symposium where the School of Industrial Relations talked about how over the course of the last 20 years, health insurance proportionally became a bigger part of an individual employee's adjusted gross income. It's just what's happening. So with drugs, you want to definitely make sure. Do you have a mail order provision? Okay. So you want to spell out how many tiers is your plan? Is it 2-tier, 3-tier? And understand what the tiers are. There's generic drugs. We all kind of know what generic drugs are. Those are the ones that do not have any more copyrights left or patents on them. Then you have brand names who still have certain patents on them. And then you have the formulary drugs. Those are your designer heart medicines, cancer medicines. And those are the ones that if you didn't have health insurance, you'd be broke because they cost anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000 per month. And so you may want to make sure that you spell that out in the contract. And bear in mind too, I always love this statistic. The average person over 50 takes 6 prescription drugs a month. So it's something that's real and you have to adjust for it. Okay, I got like 7 minutes left. So I would tell you if your unit is being asked to take a high deductible plan, talk to us about it because you really need to know about it. The one thing about a high deductible plan that has some grace is you can have a health savings account with it. It's the only plan that can have that. All right. The health savings account is money that the employer sets up for you to pay the deductibles. Now, the insurance companies are getting wise to it. And I think there's going to be some major legislation changing that in the next 5 or 7 years. But just bear in mind that you do have the ability, if you have a high deductible plan, to have a health savings account. Many of you are probably familiar with something called a flexible spending account, FSA. That's for unreimbursed medical expenses, child care, adult care. That is something you should have in your contract as well. Okay. The limit for this year is $3,200 in it. Okay. But one thing you didn't know is the employer can contribute $500 to that. So why didn't you ask them to as a proposal? Okay. And if any of you have an interest, there's a great publication by the IRS called Publication 969, explains all the things about these health-related accounts, okay? You also have health reimbursement accounts, which operate under Section 105 and 106, where, again, the employer sets up an account to the benefit the employee regarding qualified medical expenses. And those are different than unreimbursed medical expenses. So you have to understand which is the difference and what is it you want from that, okay? Those monies can also be carried over like the health savings account from year to year. The last one, which is the most important, is the cafeteria plans under Section 125 of the IRS code. Those are the ones that can be used to pay your healthcare premiums. Okay, so you definitely want to have that in your contract. And I always ask these questions at the bargaining table, in preparation of negotiations. Do you have this? I don't know. Well, call up the benefits office. They'll tell you whether you have these plans. If not, we'll put them in. All right. Another common plan is to negotiate a life insurance policy. Okay. Now, under the IRS code, the first $50,000 of payment, i.e., unfortunately, if you died, the first $50,000 is tax-free. After that, the money could be taxable unless the additional premium over 50,000 was taxable to you each year as in part of your W-2. And you'll see it. It'll say life insurance, and it'll give you like a couple $100. You'd rather pay the premium taxes on it than have the benefit taxed. So if they tax it, that's what you want. Some districts are doing disability policies, which are very good to have in your contracts. Okay. There you have long-term and short-term disability. You have to have what's commonly referred to as a grace period. And remember this, a grace period is the time in which you don't get the benefit. So that's the time you exhaust your sick leave. And I have somebody, unfortunately, who has this situation right now, and they have to wait till they qualify for the grace period. The longer the grace period, the cheaper the premium. And then you negotiate what is the payment you get on the policy. Typically, the policy premium is going to be 60% of your gross. And the reason for that is typically 40% is taxable. So they give you 60%. And then you have to figure out how long does the disability payments go? Until I retire, till I die, what's the deal? All right, another benefit we try to always put into contracts is payment of SANES dues, because that's a non-taxable fringe benefit. So if you don't have to pay for it, you can simply apply, you can simply, get the district to pay for it. And some districts oppose it because they're going to say, why am I going to pay SANES dues for you so SANES can turn around and sue us? Well, that's a kind of valid argument, but I would argue it from this perspective typically. Well, SANES is chartered by the state of New York. It's a professional organization. It's just like any NAESP or NEESP or ACSD, any of those. We just happen to also represent people and see what you get, but try to get that in. I don't have much time left, but I'm going to talk about two other provisions right now. Personnel files, very important. No material should be placed, and it should be in your contract, in your personnel file without a signature and the right to respond. Similarly, no anonymous material can be placed in your file. Third, no complaints can be put in your file if they're even identified unless they're promptly investigated and founded. So your file is clean. Second, another provision that I always look at is the grievance procedure. Does it end in binding arbitration? If it doesn't end in binding arbitration, you want to propose having binding arbitration. And if they say, no, we don't want to do it, then make a counter proposal. Well, we'll do one grievance that's advisory. And then the second one is going to be, binding arb. Make sure you have that. Does anybody have any questions? I know we don't have many people on the Zoom right now. If not, I'll just close with this. It's imperative you pay good money to join SANES. It's imperative to use SANES to do your contract negotiations. Because what I've found over the years, and Fred can vouch, I can ask you questions about the teacher contract, and you can tell me chapter and verse, where it's found, what it means. But when I ask you about your own provisions of your own contract, you look at me stupefied, like, what? Know your contract. And if you don't know it, at least have SANES review it so we can tell you what it means. All right. With that said, it was a pleasure meeting you all today on the Zoom. I will, again, if you would like to have the what I call the SANES negotiation handbook or playbook, I will certainly send it to you if you'd like. All right, Mary?
I think we're good unless we have questions. Anyone with questions?
No questions, but thank you very much.
You are very welcome, Chris.
Yes, thank you. I do have one quick question. I know everybody probably wants to go, but you talked about monies outside of the normal salary time, like for weekend events and
Right.
after school. And we keep getting told that we're exempt employees. so we don't have actual hours. How do you, maybe you can't answer that right now, but how do we work that in so that there are set things for certain things?
Well, they're confusing two terms and trying to pull one over on you. Okay? You are exempt employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Okay?
Yep.
That means that by law, school district administrators are exempt from overtime.
Right.
Overtime. Evening and weekend pay, supplemental pay is not overtime. And that's how I'd argue it.
Thanks for
And
the
I
supplemental.
Evening and weekend pay is not overtime. Okay, it's additional services rendered outside my workday. Okay? And I would say it this way too. I would always propose, and this gets management crazy. We want work hours. We want to be 8 to 4, 7 to 3:30. They go nuts when they see that. But I put that proposal in alongside the weekend and evening pay proposal, because I will get them to agree to the latter one while giving up the other one. So the other one becomes, if you will, a throwaway to get, and this is part of strategic planning, to get the weekend and evening pay. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? There being no other questions, I would say,
Nothing.
Mary?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, Art.
All right, then we are finished.
All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for joining. Art, thank you.
Yep.
Great
You're
as
welcome.
Really appreciate it.
You got it. My pleasure as always. Be
Okay.
well, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.